They told me to smile more, to stop taking things so personally, that I was too emotional, too dramatic, too much. At first, I believed them. At meetings, I kept my voice low, even when I had something worth saying. I watched my coworkers smirk across the table, their eyes flicking to each other every time I dared to speak up. The whispers behind closed doors, the way they leaned in to listen when I wasn't supposed to hear, the jokes that always came with a thin laugh and a backhanded compliment. I worked in marketing at Braylock Media, a sleek, fast-talking firm run by people who lived for appearances and punished anyone who stepped out of line. I joined thinking it would be a chance to prove myself. I had ideas, real ones, strategies, vision, data-backed innovation. But every time I brought one forward, they smiled like I was an eager child showing them a crayon drawing. "Interesting," said Darren, the creative lead, "but maybe a little intense." "You're really passionate," said Brianna, the brand director, "but let's not overthink it." Overreacting. That word followed me like a curse. When someone took credit for my work and I spoke up, I was overreacting. When I noticed the same jokes made at my expense, the same patterns, the same deliberate missteps, I was told I was being sensitive. Once, I stayed in the office late and caught them mocking my presentation from that morning. They didn't see me. I heard every word through the crack of the conference room door. "She was almost crying when she pitched that strategy," Brianna laughed. Darren chimed in. "Like we were going to let her run the quarter. Jesus." "Calm down." Their laughter sliced through me harder than anything else, not because it was cruel, but because I had known. I had felt it in my gut. And they made me question myself. I didn't say a word. Not then, not the next day. I came in early, as always, did my work, responded to their emails with the same calm, polite tone, but something had shifted. It wasn't a breakdown. It was the beginning of the next act. I started documenting everything, every missed credit, every dismissal, every time my strategy was taken, reworded, and presented by someone else. I recorded meetings, took screenshots, kept notes, quietly, without fury. Because I knew something they didn't. You don't set fire to a house while you're still inside it. You wait until you've built a better one. Outside work, I began building my escape. Late nights became blueprints. Weekends became research marathons. I reached out to contacts who had left Braylock, found out who had been driven out, who had stories like mine, and I discovered I wasn't alone. There was Will, a copywriter who'd been told he lacked brand appeal. Camille, an analyst whose forecast model had been stolen and resold under a manager's name. Dozens more. They didn't want revenge, what lay beneath the fake planet. But I did. I started building something new, not just another agency, a mirror, something that would reflect Braylock for what it truly was: hollow, fake, and fragile. I named it Act 2 Media. Subtle, precise, loaded. At first I operated in silence. I used my own money, no loans, no partnerships. I designed our platform from the ground up. No fluff, just results. Clean data pipelines, sharp creative built from people like me. The underestimated, the dismissed, the ones labeled too much. Our first campaign launched on a shoestring budget and went viral in 2 days. Clean execution, raw message, and it tore through the market Braylock used to own. They didn't know it was me. Not yet, but they felt it. One of their clients, a cosmetics brand they had overcharged and underdelivered for years, dropped them and signed with us. Then a retail startup. Then a nonprofit that Braylock had rebranded into irrelevance. Every loss hit them like a pin in a balloon, quiet, but lethal. And I kept smiling, kept answering their "how are you doing" texts with polite lies. Because the second half of the story wasn't finished. I wasn't just going to succeed. I was going to expose everything. Let them laugh. Let them roll their eyes. They called it overreacting. I called it rehearsal. 3 months after Act 2 media launched, Braylock's numbers began to slip. Not dramatically, not enough to cause panic, but the kind of slow, invisible bleed that only shows up once it's too late to stop. They were losing clients. Not to big firms, but to someone else. Someone smaller, faster, more precise. And I made sure my fingerprints stayed hidden. Until I didn't. The first time they heard the name Act 2, it came from a former client during a failed pitch. Braylock had put together one of their usual vision decks, full of polished language and nothing underneath. The client told Darren to his face, "We're going with the team that actually listened." That team was mine. Inside Braylock, the panic started slow. A flurry of internal memos, strategy meetings, shouting matches behind glass walls. I still had someone on the inside, Isha, a junior project manager who was never given the time of day until they realized she was the only one who could keep campaigns from imploding. She fed me everything. Every complaint, every desperate pivot, every internal email blaming each other for the bleeding clients. I read them in silence, cold and calm. Then I made my move. It started with a video, just a minute long, a voiceover. No names, just a story. It told the tale of a worker dismissed, mocked, ignored. The script used their exact words. Too sensitive, overreacting, not a team player. Phrases from my old performance reviews. Phrases Aisha confirmed were still being used in their culture meetings. The video ended with a line in bold white on black. Act 2, because your silence deserves a stage. It dropped on a Thursday. By Monday, it had 1.2 million views. The next campaign followed, a direct hit. We rolled out client testimonials, real stories from companies that left Braylock for us. We didn't use names. We didn't need to. Everyone in the industry knew. And now everyone else did too. The narrative had flipped. I wasn't the overreacting one anymore. I was the one telling the truth. The backlash inside Braylock was immediate. Their HR director resigned. 2 senior managers were fired in a quiet Friday night purge. But it didn't matter. The rot wasn't just in the leadership. It was in the bones. Darren reached out first. Sent me an email. No apology. Just a soft threat dressed as diplomacy. Clearly you're upset. Maybe we should talk before things escalate. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a creative marketing summit. Braylock was also scheduled to attend. I almost declined. Then I realized the stage was the perfect place for the next scene. I walked into that summit with 3 of my best team members, all people Braylock had either fired, ignored, or laughed out of meetings. The panel topic was the future of brand authenticity. I didn't hold back. I talked about how agencies manufacture relevance but ignore humanity, how they sell diversity but hire copies of the same voice, how they punish passion and reward politics. Every word was a knife, and I knew Darren and Brianna were in the audience. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then the applause hit. Afterward, a line formed. People wanting to talk, to ask about Act 2. I shook hands, answered questions, made connections. But one face stopped me. It was Brianna. Hair perfect, smile fixed, but the eyes, they weren't mocking anymore. She reached out to shake my hand. I left it hanging. "You really made something," she said. "I know." She paused. "You could have brought this to Braylock." I leaned in, close enough for only her to hear. "I did. You laughed." Her expression didn't change, but her hand dropped. That night, I stood on the balcony of my hotel, overlooking the city lights. The skyline that once felt unreachable now looked smaller than ever. Had been laughed at, ignored, erased. Now I was on every invite list. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was making sure every mask they wore slipped, and letting the world see what I already knew. The next act didn't just belong to me. It belonged to every one of us they tried to silence. After the summit, Act 2 exploded. Inboxes flooded, Applications poured in. We had to triple our vetting staff in a week just to manage the people begging for a seat at the table. Some came with resumes padded with agency buzzwords. Most were burned-out survivors looking for air. We took in the ones with fire, not polish. Meanwhile, Braylock spiraled. A leak memo surfaced. An internal document trying to reframe the situation as competitive aggression rooted in personal vendettas. They tried to spin me into a villain. It backfired. People had receipts. They posted screenshots. Old reviews, emails, stories. The same phrases again and again. Dismissed. Talked over. Muched. Gaslit. They had built a brand on silencing. And now the silence was ending. Darren left Braylock, quietly, no statement, no farewell. I only found out through an internal leak the last thing Aisha sent before resigning. She didn't come to Act 2. She didn't need to. She said she had already watched the lie collapse. That was enough for her. Braylock's board tried to recover, brought in a crisis PR team, issued an open letter full of vague language and fake humility. You are listening? We are growing. We see you. Empty theater, too late. We didn't respond. Not to their letter, not to their desperation, not when one of their clients, a publishing group, reached out to me behind closed doors and asked for help rebranding. Confidentially, they said, "We're leaving Braylock. We'd like your team." I signed them within a week. And then came the final piece. That conference. Not just any conference. The largest branding expo in the country. Held once a year, invite-only panel, audience of thousands. This time, they asked me to keynote. Braylock had applied for a slot too. They didn't get one. When I walked onto that stage, I didn't speak with anger. I didn't rant. I didn't even raise my voice. I told a story about a young worker who brought ideas to a table that never listened, who was told to smile, calm down, be less, who watched as her voice was stolen, her name erased, and her fire mocked. And then I told them what she did next, how she built something that didn't just compete, it consumed. I didn't say my old company's name. I didn't need to. The crowd knew. Ended with a warning. If you think someone is overreacting, I said, maybe it's not that they're too loud. Maybe it's that you're too comfortable. And maybe their silence is not defeat. Maybe it's the wind up. Then I walked off the stage to a standing ovation. That night I stood in my hotel room, alone, phone still buzzing from messages I didn't bother reading. Opened the balcony door and let the cold air hit me. This wasn't a victory lap. It was closure. I had lived through the ridicule, the dismissals, the false smiles and empty praise, and I had rewritten the ending. Not with blood, with truth. Braylock was still standing, but barely. They would limp along, rebrand again, try to fake relevance through TikTok interns and diversity panels, but they would never breathe the same air as me again. And every person they ever silenced now had a name to follow. Act 2. Months passed, and the dust didn't settle. It cleared. Act 2 media kept growing, but not the way agencies normally did. We didn't chase glossy clients or throw rooftop parties. We opened offices in cities where talent went ignored. Hired people with gaps in their resumes and grit in their eyes. We turned down big names who wanted our polish without our purpose. And Braylock? They became a cautionary tale. Interns whispered their name in workshops. "Don't be like them," one said in a training video we didn't make but watch spread online anyway. Their logo was mocked on design subreddits. Former employees started a blog, anonymous posts, each one a match thrown into their legacy. They tried to rebrand again, new name, new leadership, but it didn't matter. Reputation isn't something you change with font. They sent a representative to my office one day, some new executive, clean-cut and reeking of desperation under the cologne. He sat across from me, eyes scanning the walls, trying to act like this was just a meeting. "We were hoping," he said, "to discuss a potential collaboration, a fresh start." I leaned forward. "You came to the wrong story," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "This isn't a redemption arc," I said. "Not for you." He didn't get it. Most of them never did. They thought forgiveness was a transaction, a PR strategy, a handshake. They never understood that some scars don't fade. They sharpen. I stood and nodded toward the door. "Next time, send someone who remembers how this started," I said. "Or don't send anyone at all." He left. That was the last time Braylock reached out. A year after that, we launched the Reclaim Project, a full pipeline mentorship and funding initiative for creatives who had been pushed out, erased, overlooked. I put the first $1 million in myself, not as a donation, as fuel. People from every corner of the industry applied, former receptionists with vision, coders with dreams buried under debt, artists with portfolios that no one had taken seriously until now. We gave them more than a chance. We gave them the same thing I had clawed for: a voice. One evening, I sat in the quiet of my home office. Not the polished headquarters, not the public spaces, just me. A chair, a desk. The same kind of silence that once threatened to consume me. But this silence didn't hurt anymore. It hummed, the kind of silence that follows closure. My old notebook sat on the shelf nearby, the one I used during Braylock's rise and collapse. Pages full of mock-ups, pain, evidence, plans. I pulled it out, thumbed through it. There were notes I hadn't read in years. Words I wrote in the dark, scared and angry and tired. They had laughed, called me dramatic, overreacting, and I wrote everything down. Not because I needed proof, but because I knew one day the second half would begin, and they would be watching. I closed the notebook and put it back. Not because I was done, but because the ending had been written. I didn't return for applause. I didn't rise for revenge. I rose because they tried to write me out, and I refused to fade. This wasn't a comeback. It was an act of war, and the curtain had closed.